When my family and I relocated to the United States via the Refugee Resettlement Program, I imagined resuming my career in banking, finance, and information technology. To my surprise, my ability to communicate in Kiswahili seemed a more important skill than those that I had acquired in Kenya in my previous career. I was disappointed, since I had imagined that I would launch right back into the career that I loved. I reluctantly agreed to interpret for the limited English proficient population within my community without giving it much thought. First, at the local resettlement agency, where I worked at the front desk, and later in other arenas as they opened up. Pretty soon, I was recruited to interpret for the limited English proficient patients in medical settings and other settings as well. The pivotal moment occurred when I repeated what the doctor asked the patient. How do you eat an elephant? And instead of the patient nodding in agreement to this common phrase, he became indignant and asked why the doctor was asking about eating elephants. Did we not know that only the very poor in his community ate elephants? And all of a sudden, the conversation that was supposed to be one of reassurance, that his issues would be taken care of one at a time, turned into one that left the patient feeling insulted and belittled by the implication that he was poor. And that was the moment it dawned on me that language interpretation was more than just about the exchange of words, and that it must include the culture behind the language, the meaning and the context, since culture determines how we use our language. I reflected on my own integration into a new culture. I spoke English, which made it easier to transition into life in the United States, easier than for those who didn't. And this also made me the perfect control group for my theory that we need cultural interpreters, not just language interpreters. At the risk of dating myself, I had been exposed to sitcoms like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and The Jeffersons, and movies like Eddie Murphy's Coming to America, before coming to the United States. But nothing can really prepare you for life in a new culture. I found myself relying heavily on the support of the daycare teachers to help me figure out what my daughter was talking about when she would bring home the American slang like boogers and cooties, pig in a blanket, and mac and cheese, which she referred to as crony cheese. Having grown up in a country that used metric units of measurements, I had to learn the imperial units. I had to figure out exactly how much milk is in a gallon, and how much does a pound of beef really weigh, and what does 70 degrees Fahrenheit really feel like. And inasmuch as I was an English speaker, I began to understand how challenging it must be. And I was filled with a new sense of empathy for those attempting to navigate life in this unfamiliar culture without the language skills. Social norms highlighted the cultural differences. As a student at Boise State University, I observed how college students referred to the age of their parents, making it sound like their parents were over the hill and far away and completely irrelevant. In my country of origin, our elders are revered and respected. Another contrast involved marriage. Americans expressed disbelief that my grandfather had 3 wives, simultaneously. I expressed wonder at the Western practice of serial monogamy. One spouse, after another, after another, after another. My own immersion into the American culture helped me learn to make the cultural equivalences that I needed in the work that I did. I found myself standing in the gap, decoding one culture and the language into the other culture and its language. When interpreting in health-related services, I began to broker the cultures by explaining the differences in medical approaches. My clients were culturally accustomed to lifestyle modifications as a means to manage their diseases. So when the medical providers prescribed medication, they would appear non-compliant when they did not take their medications as prescribed. Filling in these cultural gaps helped build a bridge between the patient and the provider. A training session on working within the courtroom taught me a priceless lesson on understanding the culture that you're working in, so that when the judge says something like, the defendant is one French fry short of a Happy Meal, then as an interpreter, I'm able to communicate to my client the humorous message that has just been conveyed without stopping and asking, Your Honor, what is a Happy Meal? And what difference does one French fry make in this legal case? As our community and world continues to open its doors to refugees and other immigrants, I am honored to continue help build these bridges that we can walk across as we get to know each other. I recently accompanied a Congolese woman who has limited English proficiency to a private citizen's home for dinner. She had been invited to share her story about what led to her fleeing her country and landing here. Knowing that the Congolese do not eat pork, I whispered to my client that there is a possibility that dinner could have pork, and asked her how she would like me to handle that. On the other side, I spoke to the host and told him that there's a possibility that his choice of meat may be a cultural challenge for his guest. I was delighted to help them navigate this hurdle. Many of us have become accustomed to making accommodations for our friends and family who may have food allergies, and we can extend the same awareness for cultural reasons. I have a professional role interpreting language and culture. But I put it to you that we are all cultural brokers, interpreting on behalf of those in our cultures and subcultures. We do this in our families. As parents, we might encourage our children to send a thank you note to the grandparents while urging the grandparents to accept text messages as a modern way of expressing gratitude. We do this when we introduce our older children to a new sibling and help them bond and form that new relationship. We do this in our workplaces, officially when we onboard new employees to benefits programs and work responsibilities, and unofficially when we make suggestions on how a new colleague might approach the boss or another colleague with a proposal. We do this in our faith, sports, and academic communities. When we teach religious customs and holiday traditions, when we teach sporting rituals and what sportsmanship looks like, and academic protocols as well. You do most of this cultural brokering without even thinking about it. But when you take it to yourself, consciously and purposefully, thinking of yourself as I do, as a cultural broker, how different our communities and our world might look. As we engage and allow ourselves to learn about the other, we will build richer, more meaningful connections and communities, all because we choose to be cultural brokers. When I started out, I was the reluctant interpreter. I didn't value my ability to speak 3 languages as highly as I should have. I'm glad that I eventually did. I've had the privilege of serving many people in times of need. You may not think that you have valuable skills or knowledge either, but I assure you, you do. Somebody around you needs you to be their interpreter in order to thrive in their new culture and subculture. Will you step up to the plate and serve them? Thank you.